This is InvestorIdeas.com at the Extraordinary Future Conference hosted by Cambridge House International. The two-day conference held in Vancouver September 19th and 20th featured the hottest Canadian technologies for investors, showcasing everything from esports to blockchain, cannabis, electric cars, and security. In our interview today, we talked to Province Brands. Province Brands is an early-stage Toronto-based disruptive premium adult beverage company founded by entrepreneurs with experience in the alcohol and legal, medicinal, and recreational cannabis industries. Province Brands' patent-pending process has created the world's first beer brewed using cannabis. Alcohol-free yet intoxicating, and with dose-response curves similar to that of alcohol, we catch up with their CEO, Duma, to learn more about the new cannabis company.
My name is Duma Winshu, and I'm from Province Brands of Canada. And Province Brands is patent pending on the world's first beers brewed from the cannabis plant.
All right, so you've sort of given me the overlay of what you guys do, how everything's working with your company. The biggest thing I want to know about is taste. How are you either enhancing or eliminating some of the bitterness of the cannabis taste? Because that's a big thing for most of the oil concentrates of the world. All the people who are making like the CBD oils or the THC oils, the biggest thing is that people do not like
that bitter flavor.
The bitter flavor. How do you turn that into a good flavor? Because you guys have boasted that your flavor is good.
Our flavor is good. It's very interesting that when you think about that bitterness, a lot of that bitterness comes from the infusion process, sort of the oil, which is concentrating, right?
Yes.
So when you concentrate, you're also concentrating that bitter sensation. Because we don't need to infuse our beverage, because our beverage is brewed from the cannabis plant, it doesn't have a lot of that bitterness, which is not to say it's sweet, right? We are basically
Absolutely.
a dry sort of a flavor, but it is bitter. It's got hops in it, so the hops gives it a bitter sensation, or bitter flavor, and it has the bitterness from the cannabis, but it's not overwhelming. The best way to describe the flavor of this is, I don't know if you've had any of these. Have you had any of these hemp beers that are on the market?
Yes.
So, if you tried one of those, but imagine a less sweet version of that.
Okay.
And that doesn't taste like marijuana.
No.
And our beverage doesn't. I mean, it tastes maybe a little more like marijuana than that, but it tastes more like that than it would taste like a infused beverage or a joint or something like this.
So I want to get into, you do have your 8 ABV Pilsner is your main sort of flagship right now.
Well, our flagship are our products that are brewed from marijuana,
Okay.
and they'll be available in October of 2019. What we've done so far is we've prepared these beverages and gotten them ready to bring them to the market, and we also got tired of waiting for legalization of marijuana, and we wanted to get a beverage out there, and so we're just about to launch a beer that is brewed from hemp.
Okay.
So this is an 8% ABV Imperial Pilsner made from hemp instead of our other beers, which will be made from marijuana. I wouldn't call it a flagship. It's just sort of a fun project we're doing on the side.
So the marijuana ones that are brewed from the stems and stalks, they're going to be 100% alcohol free?
Correct. They will not contain alcohol. I mean, they might contain like trace amounts, but you would need a very strong microscope.
Okay, so yeah,
they're not.
It's not sugar acting or yeast acting on the sugar then.
It is yeast acting on the sugar,
But in a different way.
What we've done at Province, which is so cool, is that we started this company, we met with top master brewers from around the world, and we said, hey, can you help us? We want to brew a beer from cannabis. And I didn't know anything about brewing. I used to be in video games. And they explained to me that beer is brewed from barley, and by effectively taking those carbohydrates that are in the barley and converting those carbohydrates into sugars so that the yeast can act on the sugar, right? You could throw yeast on barley all day long. Nothing's going to happen. You have to mash it first. And we have discovered a way to mash the cannabis plant. At first we tried all these different things, like, maybe we can use the carbohydrates that are in the seeds, because like there's a little carbohydrates in seeds. But first of all, it would have been crazy expensive. And second of all, we couldn't figure out a way to do it. But, we realized eventually, like, everything is a carbohydrate. So, you eat your salad, that lettuce is a carbohydrate. You don't think of it because you think of carbs like bread and potatoes, but like lettuce is
higher
carb
and
too.
lower values.
Yeah, exactly. So we found a way to basically break open that cellulose, like the lettuce, but it's cannabis. We break open the cellulose and are able to extract the sugars from that cellulose through a mashing process, which is super cool.
So it's alcohol free.
Yep.
What is going to be the effects then of this product as far as CBD, THC?
So we are experimenting with right now with sort of 4 varieties: a sativa, an indica, a hybrid, and a CBD sensation. Now, the CBD sensation is still going to intoxicate you.
Yep.
We make adult beverages. Every product is designed to intoxicate you. We've been zeroing in on the 6.5 milligrams of THC and about 9 milligrams of total phytocannabinoids. So that means there's another 2.5 milligrams of other phytocannabinoids, CBD, CBG, other stuff, right, that ends up into the beverage as well. But it's designed to sort of be a fairly low dose so that you could drink one of these beers and you would get an intoxication amount that is equivalent to drinking one normal beer, assuming you've had alcohol before and assuming you've had cannabis before. Because obviously if it's your first time, it might hit you harder, but once you've consumed before...
Like everything, there's tolerance levels.
Yeah, exactly. You got to build a little tolerance.
So you talked about sativa and indica strains right away. Have you done any testing, or are you noticing that there is a big difference between, for instance, using different brands or different strains of the cannabis waste that you're using for your product? So, for instance, if it's a higher grade cannabis product that you're getting that waste from, is that creating a higher grade beverage for you at the end?
So there's a bunch of differences. We've noticed color differences from different strains. Flavor seems to sort of be pretty much consistent, and maybe that's because we haven't tried enough to know for sure. But we seem to have a consistent experience when it comes to flavor. But the main differences are in the amount of psychoactive and the quality of the psychoactive, right?
Is there a big effect on different terpenes in the actual cannabis plant? Does that change because there are certain terpenes that have certain smells, tastes, flavor profiles associated with them? Obviously, I take that with a grain of salt because I know that that's not as accurate as people make it believe.
I would say terpenes are very important. I would also say that when you make a beer, you're doing this at a very high temperature.
Yes.
And a lot of the terpenes that are in the plant initially will volatilize at the high temperature. So our beer right now does not have a lot of the terpenes that you would expect from smoking marijuana.
So you're not going to have a difference from like a sour diesel and an OG.
Well, use different phytocannabinoids. You'd have different phytocannabinoids and different flavonoids. The flavonoids we make sure end up in the final product.
Okay.
But a lot of the terpenes will volatilize, and the smell-based terpenes will volatilize, and we may introduce those again. So this is a product that's under development. By the time it gets to market, we may decide to reintroduce the terpenes before people have the beverage. But to give an example, so we make this product from stalk, stems, and roots of the cannabis plant, which is a waste stream for folks in the cannabis industry. Right? They can't throw it away. They can't incinerate it. We take it off their hands and we use it to brew our beverage. Now, you asked me 3 years ago, can that get you high? I would have said no. I mean, I think there's a common misconception that there really aren't any phytocannabinoids in the stalk, stems, and roots of the cannabis plant. What we found is, in fact, there are some, but there's not a lot.
Yeah.
And so there's not enough to make a 6.5 milligram beer, for example. So the way we make our beer is we measure the phytocannabinoid content in the starting material, the stalk, stems, and roots, before we start mashing. And we get an idea of how much trim we would need to add into the mash before brewing. So we will also add some leaves, some trim, no flour, but just some leaves in there. Usually we don't have to add so much, and we'd also have to measure the phytocannabinoid content of the trim. So between those two, we can figure out how much trim, how much stalk, stems, and roots is the optimal combination to ensure that 6.5 milligrams. So when you were talking about, to answer your question a little while ago, what's the difference between different batches? That's the biggest difference, right?
Okay.
Is how much phytocannabinoids are going to end up in the starting material.
Aging, just because I already know the beverage industry quite well. Have you guys looked into this? Obviously, it's a new process for you.
Right.
Is there a shelf life on these products, or is there an extended effect of aging these products? For instance, obviously with anything as it sits, beer can go flat over years.
Yep.
But also other certain alcohols, if you guys are switching into maybe a more concentrated, like a liqueur or something like that, maybe down the future, what's the aging potential of these, or what's the short shelf life?
Well,
have you looked into
we
that?
think of aging in a lot of different ways. So, part of aging is how long do you ferment for, right? So we're starting with Imperial Pilsner that will need to ferment for 28 days. It's a long time.
Short time in the beer world, though.
Yeah, I guess that's true, but for us, that's a long time to churn. But this is a craft product, and we really believe in sort of the craftsmanship of what we're doing, and we want to get that really rich flavor, and it's worth waiting. It means we're going to make less money, we're going to make less product. Yeah. That's okay, because we're making better product, right?
The craft market is the industry for the liquor market now. So.
Exactly, and as it turns out, I mean, we still have to do some stability testing on the product, but it right now it appears that we're going to be able to get 6 months stability, no problem. And we have not noticed any separation of the phytocannabinoids from the
So there's
the
no
liquid.
breakdown over time at this point?
The breakdown would probably be flavor as opposed to phytocannabinoids coming out of solution, and we need to study that and see when it starts.
New product, obviously.
Yeah,
you guys can't test years worth of data when you've only been around for a year or so. Another thing you mentioned that obviously you guys did talk to a lot of different brewmasters at the start.
Yep.
They dismissed you guys. Have you had, since your products now sort of come into a realistic perspective, are you guys getting any interest from brewmasters, or is there anyone who's coming on board your team from that brewery craft market?
Well, one of our most valued members of our team is Rob Kevwich, who is a PhD chemist and a master brewer. And so he, how it began was we had this crazy idea to brew a beer from cannabis, and we met with all these master brewers, and they said it couldn't be done. And we did find a great brewer in Montreal who was willing to experiment and help us try to brew a beer from cannabis, and it tastes like rotten broccoli. Like, you couldn't drink this stuff at all. It was terrible, and it was so bad. And then we hired a flavor consultant from Tennessee, and they're like, oh, we'll make it taste great. And they did sort of make it taste like moderately better, but it still tasted like something that didn't taste good, but might have been good for you, but it was awful. But when we did the math, we realized that they were using certain types of the plant, and they were expensive. It would have cost $60 a bottle, so that wasn't going anywhere. And we were about to give up at the end of the day. And I remembered that there was a brewery I'd gone to in Colorado that I just loved their beer, and I remembered that someone saying that the reason their beers were so good is because their master brewer is a PhD chemist. And so I just never met this guy, but I called him out of the blue, and I was like, hey, you don't know me. I'm calling you from Canada. I really like your beer, and we're having a problem. And he was the guy who sort of cracked the code and figured out how we could make something that tastes phenomenal from the stalk, stems, and roots of the cannabis plant. Yeah, so it's amazing. So that's how we got our master brewer. But in terms of other master brewers, what's happened now is that a lot of these guys, they hear all this stuff about marijuana. They want to get into the industry, and they have a brand, and they want people to learn about their brand, who are marijuana fans, maybe not drinkers. And so they have come to us and said, can you brew us a beer, a marijuana beer? And so we are, because if you have a brewery right now, you can't touch marijuana because you would need to get a marijuana license. And there's a lot of work to get a license in Health Canada. So we will be performing contract brewing services for quite a few brewers, and also for some licensed producers.
Investor Ideas reminds all listeners to read our disclaimers and disclosures on the InvestorIdeas.com website, and this podcast is not an endorsement to buy products or services or securities. Investors are reminded all investment involves risk and possible loss of investment. Please read the disclaimer page on InvestorIdeas.com for more info.